Hello, and welcome back to the Vale of Nightmares. In our entry this week, we are going on the classic hero's quest for love and virtue. We have a missing princess and a kingdom in turmoil. Will our little Knight of Dawn be able to bring the king some peace and rescue his daughter, or will he get lost in all the side quest? Let's party up and find out how this story ends. This is the Knight's Quest. Chapter 1: The King's Decree. The kingdom of Eldralor had been plunged into despair ever since Princess Seraphina had disappeared. The king, driven half-mad by grief, declared to the realm, whoever could return his beloved daughter would be granted lands, riches, and a noble title beyond measure. The proclamation rang out across the land, and knights from every corner answered the call. But one by one, each hero vanished, leaving only whispers and the echoes of forgotten names. Sir Alric of the Dawn, a knight forged by honor and unyielding virtue, could not ignore the toll the quest had taken. His brothers in arms, each a symbol of strength and nobility, had set forth on this very mission, never to return. Their fates were etched into the fabric of legend, their names spoken in hushed tones around taverns and firesides. But Alric, unwilling to let their sacrifice be in vain, vowed to find Seraphina.
I will find her,
Alric proclaimed in the throne room, his voice unwavering. The king, eyes hollow from years of grief, gave a smile that never quite reached his eyes. There was something darker there, something veiled in the depths of his gaze. Chapter 2: The Hero's Journey. Alric's journey began in Briarhollow, a bustling market town on the edge of the kingdom. Whispers of a pale maiden wandering the moors at twilight tugged at his heart. Villagers spoke of strange lights flickering through the fog and mournful cries carried by the wind. Something was amiss in the land, and Alric knew his quest would not be simple. Through the bramble-filled forests and murky bogs he ventured, where the eyes of wolves glowed with ember light, watching his every move. The winds whispered his name, and shadows clung to the path, like an invisible force pushing against him. Yet Alric remained undeterred, aiding those in need along the way, sharing his food with a starving widow, guiding a lost child home. His virtue shone like a beacon, but the weight of the land's darkness grew heavier with every step. The village of Hearthglen offered him little comfort. An old crone, her eyes sunken deep within wrinkled sockets, spoke of a ruin where shadows danced in the night.
Many have gone to find the princess. None have returned, for the place you seek is shrouded in an eerie shadow.
She mused, her voice thick with the knowledge of unspoken horrors. Alric's sword tightened in his grip, a silent vow on his lips. He would be the one to return. Chapter 3: The Trials of Virtue. Trial 1: The Weeping Widow. Alric's path led him to the village of Wormsford, where a widowed woman had been mourning her late husband for weeks. She had been a woman of immense beauty and kindness, but now, despair had hollowed her out. She told Alric of her lost love, how her husband had been killed by a band of marauders who ransacked their home. Alric offered his help, intending to give the widow a chance to finally move on from her grief. But she asked him to accompany her to the burial site of her husband, where she had set up an altar to keep his spirit close. As Alric stood by the grave, she pleaded with him to stay longer, urging him to speak of his own losses.
What do you fear most, Sir Knight? What if you lost everything? Would you fight for those you love, or would you surrender?
His honor was tested by her grief. She had no way of knowing, but her sorrow began to consume him. He felt his heart grow heavy with the weight of the world, and his deepest fears began to claw at his thoughts. He stayed, for hours longer than he should have, holding her hand, listening to her pleadings, his resolve weakening under the pressure of her endless, aching need. It was a simple choice to make: stay, help, and offer the warmth of his virtue, or leave, abandoning her to her sorrow. Alric stayed, the weight of his selflessness pushing him closer to the edge of compassion's darkness. He gave too much, and as he did, he felt his virtue slip away, like sand through his fingers. Trial 2: the children of Thornfield. Alric continued his journey to Thornfield, a village plagued by an unusual curse. A terrible sickness had struck the children, and none could explain its origin. The healer of the village spoke of an ancient pact made long ago with a shadowy force, and now the price had come due. The children, the very future of the village, were suffering. Without hesitation, Alric took it upon himself to find a way to break the curse, promising the healer that he would save the children. He found an old hermit who spoke of a cure, a flower that could heal even the most grievous affliction. But it came at a price. To retrieve the flower, he must sacrifice something of his own. The hermit warned that the price would be steep, but Alric, blind to the dangers, set off to gather the cure. In the deep woods, Alric found the flower in a glade, bathed in moonlight. But as he reached for it, a vision overtook him. The faces of the children, suffering, writhing in pain. And then another face appeared, his mother, long since passed, calling to him.
Alric, my beautiful baby boy, I know that your heart is heavily burdened by the grief of my passing. In order to cast aside this pain, I implore you to save the children, as you could not save me.
The temptation was immense. The vision promised that if Alric gave up his own life in place of the children, they would be healed. His body would wither, but his soul would be at peace, knowing he had saved them. He could feel his virtue strain against this offer, but he chose the path of sacrifice. He took the flower back to the village, and the children were healed. But in his act of selflessness, his essence had already begun to fade. The cost was not in fact his life. No, the cost was something deeper, a part of his soul now missing, leaving him vulnerable to what is to come. Trial 3. The Descent into WRM's Hollow. As Alric ventured deeper into the cursed lands, he arrived at WRM's Hollow, a vast swamp where ancient and monstrous beasts were said to roam. The people of the village near the hollow spoke of a great terror, a dragon who had long been guarding an artifact, a relic of immense power. The villagers begged Alric to slay the dragon and bring them the artifact, for it was said to be the key to ending the suffering the creature had caused. But when Alric entered the hollow, the dragon was no beast at all. It was a man, twisted by the years, cursed into an ancient draconian form. His heart burned with regret, and his soul longed for redemption. He spoke to Alric, telling him of the many souls he had consumed in his madness.
I was once like you, a knight. I was consumed by my own virtue, by my own pride. In my quest to save this world, I became a monster.
Alric's sword was drawn, but his heart was torn. The dragon-turned man begged for mercy, asking Alric to end his suffering. But Alric could not bring himself to kill him. The man's anguish mirrored his own. He saw himself in the monster's eyes. And so, Alric stayed, unwilling to strike the killing blow, staying for hours as the man raved about his eternal torment. His virtue was tested again. This time, it was not his compassion that suffered. It was his pride, his refusal to act decisively. Alric could not bear to end the man's suffering, choosing instead to help him. But in doing so, he failed the trial. His honor, once firm and unshakable, had begun to erode, and with it his virtue. Chapter 4. The Dark Castle. At long last, Alric found it, the castle, an ancient spire of stone and thorns, a place where even the earth seemed to recoil. The gates creaked open, a breath of cold air spilling into the night, as if the castle itself had been waiting. Silence greeted him, a suffocating quiet that pressed in from all sides. He stepped into the great hall, the dust of centuries beneath his boots. His voice echoed through the empty chambers as he called out,
Princess Seraphina?
The walls seemed to close in on him, and as he walked deeper into the hall, the air grew colder. At the end of the room, a figure stood bathed in pale moonlight, her form delicate and ethereal. Her gown shimmered with threads of silver and midnight, and her eyes, deep and unblinking, held him in place, like a moth drawn to an endless flame.
She whispered, her voice a melody tinged with sorrow, almost regret. Young knight, you came for me.
It was then that Alric felt the first stirrings of doubt, a slight shiver at the back of his neck. But he pressed forward, duty overriding his instinct. Chapter 5: The Truth Revealed.
Your father mourns you. The kingdom withers in your absence. He has sent me here to return you to his side and save you from these shadows.
His voice thick with the weight of his mission. Unwavering and unmoving, he waited for her reply.
She smiled, her lips curling like the petals of a dying flower. And so you come, a noble knight, pure of heart, blind in your pursuit. You and all of those before you, and the ones before them, and the ones before that. And so on we go for what seems like an eternity of the fallen.
Alric's heart skipped a beat, his grip tightening on his sword. He advanced, but something felt wrong. The castle seemed to warp around him. Her form shimmered, the edges of her body dissolving into mist. The world twisted, the walls bending inward as figures emerged from the shadows. Knights, their armor rusted and their eyes hollow. They stood as though they had never fallen, their bodies propped up by the tendrils of darkness.
You see, my foolish knight, they much like you, came to rescue the poor trapped damsel, she crooned, her voice now hollow and ancient. Each so pure of heart. For you see, little knight, you all taste so much better after so many virtuous deeds.
A chill crawled up Alric's spine, his blood turning cold as the realization hit.
What the fuck are you? Stay away from me, you fucking monster. His breath caught and realization kicked in. Is this really happening?
Her skin cracked, molten gold seeping through the cracks like sunlight through stone. Her bones began to twist and elongate, her true form finally revealed. A vile creature that feasted on the very essence of virtue. Her mouth stretched wider, jagged teeth gleaming like the fangs of a beast from a nightmare.
The king's devotion is a sweet offering, she whispered, her voice now a mocking caress. An eternal bargain. A father's love twisted into devotion, into worship. He sends you to me, and I feed. His kingdom thrives on the blood of those he loves most.
Chapter 6: The Final Embrace. Alric drew his sword, but it felt heavier than it ever had before. The weight of his own virtue seemed to drain from him, his strength slipping away with every breath. The room was growing darker, the shadows thickening around him. He sank to his knees, his vision blurring. The light in his eyes dimmed, the warmth of his soul draining into the cold, empty air. The Virtue Eater's touch was ice, her lips a chill that crept into his bones. His last breath escaped in a cloud of vapor, fading into nothingness. His body remained upright, as though frozen in time, his armor now rusted and his soul devoured. As the castle fell silent, the king, far away, would soon send another knight, another offering, another pure soul to feed the hunger that had lived in the shadows for centuries. And Seraphina, or what remained of her, would wait. This is the end of the knight's quest. We hope you have enjoyed this little adventure into the love of a father. Until next we meet in this little digital haunt. Remember, sometimes the love for our children can make monsters of us all.